All right, we're gonna call the meeting, the town hall open. Will you all rise for the pledge, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sarah, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Early? Here. Commissioner Weeding? Commissioner Walsh?
Here.
Commissioner Wilczek?
Here.
Mayor Hart?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dale, Commissioner Walsh, because he's the one that was responsible for putting it together. So it's all up to you, Dale.
Thanks, Mayor. I just, in case there are new people here, thought it was a good idea last time in October, just introduce ourselves. I'm Dale Walsh, Commissioner of Streets and Public Improvements.
I'm Ron Wilczek, Commissioner of Public Health and Safety.
Karen Hart, Mayor.
Kim Erling, Commissioner of Accounts and Finance.
Tony Altieri, City Administrator.
Sarah Weaver, City Clerk.
Thanks. And I want to introduce Doug Pryor, President and CEO of the Will County Center for Economic Development. And thanks for coming, Doug. It's kind of a bad night, but
Of course, no, happy to be here.
I'll tell you, I didn't get any. I asked some people to send email questions. I didn't get any questions. If anybody has a question, you can write it down or bring it up here. I was just going to get it started with a question for you, Doug. After if you want to say something to start out, then I've got a few questions for you.
Sure. From my perspective, again, Doug Pryor with Will County Center for Economic Development. We are a nonprofit regional development organization supporting Will County and its communities in business attraction and retention efforts, and also doing work to try to improve the developing community. That can mean anything from legislative support for our businesses to infrastructure support, waterway infrastructure, education. Certainly anything to try to improve the development community in Will County. And from my perspective, this is a place where we've been incredibly fortunate. Will County over the last 5 years is the largest job creator in Illinois by a significant margin. We've continued to see some robust economic growth in this area, and look, it's a function of a few things, right? It's still a place where population is growing. It's a place where we had land available to see continued investment. And certainly we have a strong workforce here that, still a significant portion of it works here in Will County and the surrounding areas. So we've seen a lot of growth on that front. And I don't want to monologue. This is not my show. Happy to take any questions or say more, but I will pause there.
Okay, I wanted to get started, just ask you, how do you envision the I-55 corridor coming south from, say, where Center Point is, Elwood, down through, I believe Reed Road down here is the far south end of Will County. How do you see that in the next 15, 20 years developing?
So from a development standpoint, I will say, like over the course of the last year or 18 months, right, once rates rose, a lot of the new development took a bit of a breather, and we saw a lot of markets reset in that space, and that's how development works. We see these cycles where you see a lot of pressure on the outward areas, and then that pulls back when you have a pullback, and it'll start to build back again. But over a longer time horizon, 15 years, I do think the 55 South corridor is likely to be a target for continued development. I mean, certainly in this region and near to the intermodals, we've seen industrial growth push that way. The challenge we've had has really been, as you look further north, right, start ticking off exits, right? You get south of Arsenal, there's a little bit of land that can be developed on the west side that DuPont used to own. But you start moving further south, there are fewer interchanges. River Road right on the freeway, not really, right? The next exit, Helion, is there and kind of has that corner for the Wilmington space. And then you get down to 113 and Reed. Reed is probably the best target in terms of actual visible land area adjacent to the freeway where there's room to grow. And so I think certainly in the medium term, to long term, 5 to 15 years, like you're describing, it's likely that you're going to see additional pressure, in that space. Now, ultimately, what form that takes, like what specific sort of development, I gave up on predicting the future over the course of the last few years because I was wrong a lot. But there is likely that you're going to see continued pressure for industrial in that space, particularly given that a lot of the corridors where that was very active are largely built out, right? So if you look at the 55 communities to the north, Bolingbrook, Romeoville, largely built out. Crest Hill, largely built out. Even South Joliet, the area that can be built, Centerpoint's running out of room. And so you're going to see that continued outward pressure around the intermodals. I think we can expect that. Beyond that, look, highway retail, highway visible industries are always going to be popular. Whether that is hotel properties or commercial properties. It's the hotel market has grown in the last couple of years countywide. We've added a couple hundred rooms. There are a couple more projects in the pipeline. In general, the revenue numbers look good for hotel folks to still be looking around. And a lot of that is driven, you see hotels that are just popping up in communities. Like, what? We don't have tourists, right? It's not tourists typically. It is contracts with either companies that are bringing people into work, or in a lot of cases, the railroads. They contract with specific hotels to have their staff stay in those places when they're in town. So we continue to see interest in that as well. But the truth is, it's really hard to be predictive of exactly what the project will be. In general, we work with plus or minus 100 large-scale proposal requests every year. That can range, everything from your basic big box industrial to manufacturing to data centers to chemical and petrochemical production, energy projects, and as often as not, having a site that is ready, that is zoned, has utilities at or near the site, or has a plan to get them there. It is probably the most important tool you can have. Speed to market matters as much as anything on just about every one of these deals that we see now.
And beyond, maybe south of Reed Road, also going into the next county south.
So we don't talk about Livingston County, but look, Livingston's got a couple of great sites, and it should just, to be fair, right? I used to do a similar job in Grundy County, and in Grundy we worked with Livingston and specifically Dwight quite a bit, right? They've got a couple of great sites there. They've got a dual rail served site down there that would be great for an industrial project. In general, projects like that, when you get that far south, labor becomes a bit of a challenge. You're sort of in between the suburbs and Bloomington, and you're trying to imagine you can pull from both. In a case like that, the scale of the project matters, right? Or if you're fortunate enough to have some specialized labor in the area that benefits you, great. But in general, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about that as you go south, and then you don't have to go too much further south to find yourself in Bloomington. And with Rivian's expansion there, we've definitely seen added housing demand and growth in that community as well. And you'll see that start to push out around the fringes, but the scale's smaller, right? I mean, it's I think Rivian's added something on the order of 5,000 jobs over the last few years. Like, Will County alone has added 17,000 over that same time frame. So you kind of, the scale is a bit different from that perspective. So I don't see them aggressively pushing north.
Chris?
Go ahead with your question.
No, I'm just filling in with questions,
Okay.
but I want you to get.
Chris?
So,
Speak
Chris
up.
Erling. Oh.
Front and center.
So we can
You
hear
know
you.
the drill.
Chris Erling, 180 Mitchell Street. So my question is, a lot, I mean, for Braidwood here, it's pretty heavily known that, I don't know that anybody here is interested in the heavy industrial, that we see up north. And you're talking to one who I drove truck, for many years. That was my business. And, but at the same time, I would like to see some growth of Braidwood. What that growth is, I'm not sure yet. But, we're used to mom and pop, growth, I guess, or mom and pop, stuff. So, I guess really my biggest question is, all this expansion, all, future expansion, it's great for, the businesses and the people who are running in businesses, in other words, fill in their pockets. But so maybe maybe you might not be able to answer this question, but I mean, at what point do we just say, all right, our taxes are not going down. They never go down. They always go up. I mean, so what about the expansion? Why not just stay Braidwood? Why not just stay mom and pop, build some more residentials? I mean, I drive to Morris, I drive to Joliet, I drive to Kankakee now. I don't have a problem doing that. If I need something, I'll go drive to it. So why would I care about the growth of some warehouse and support some big business or whatever that wants to build here if I never see anything out of it, mainly my taxes?
Right. So I guess the good news about a question like that is, and I talk about this a lot, right? We work with 37 communities in Will County and a lot more through the Chicago area. And we're talking about communities from, Naperville to Braidwood, east to Beecher and Cretin, Indiana, right? It's a big place with a lot of different communities. And I always tell folks, the first time I meet with a new mayor or a new council, it's important to stress that we will never come in and try to tell you what kind of community that you should build, right? We want to help you build the community you want. And that answer is different from town to town and often from neighborhood to neighborhood, right? In terms of what folks want. And so, you could say, hey, we don't want that highway industrial. We don't think it benefits us. And, a lot of communities have made that choice. The flip side of that is, of course, when you are positioning yourself for either growth or not growth, right? And that's a choice that ultimately every community has to make on their own. The challenge you sometimes face is that growth will come to you, whether or not you're looking for it. And if you find yourself in a situation where, let's say you've got a chunk of land and that land has been zoned and annexed a certain way for a long time, folks have the opportunity to sell it, right? If it's already zoned, the community can't say no at that point, right? That's something you have to do earlier in the planning process, earlier in the zoning process, and make those decisions. And the reality is zoning is money for landowners, right? The big difference in land value between an industrial zone piece of land and like an R1 residential zone piece of land. And so if you go changing what you have out there, you're going to have some upset folks. That said, the benefit of economic growth, I can sit here and pretend that growth for growth's sake is fabulous. It's the best. Look at us go. That's not the truth, right? The truth is the growth has to fit the profile that you're looking for. And you say taxes never go down. Happily, we are a separate non-for-profit. I am not a tax rate setter, but I will say largely that's true, right? You see a lot of taxes stay stable, or that rise over time. I would argue that growth in other spaces does help stabilize it a little bit, right? A community like this where you have a nuclear power generation facility in your school district, property taxes stay lower here than just about anywhere else, right? Because of that. Great, fabulous benefit. But that's not the city, and that's not a lot of your other taxing bodies. And so creating other revenue offsets, whether they are sales tax generators, property tax generators, help offset future costs. Because the truth is, paving roads isn't getting any cheaper, running water and sewer systems isn't getting any cheaper, and paying for police isn't getting any cheaper. If you hold everything stable in the long run, taxes are going to rise just based on the cost of those few important services that communities provide. So I would just say it's about balance. I hear you. You're right about that. But it really is about balance as a community grows.
So to summarize, a part of that, would that be wise to say that without extra businesses, taxes are going to increase more? It's just that they will continue to increase, but they'll increase less if we have more business to bring in more tax revenue.
Well, I think ideally, I would never say to an elected official like taxes just automatically increase. I don't want to put those words in your mouth, but I will say that in general, the cost of things that you have to pay for do increase. And, most communities, a lot of the services they provide are very prescriptive, right? We're running the water and sewer, we're running police, we're running, roads and bridges. And the last few years have been tough in that space from a cost perspective. And so I think in general, as your costs rise, you've got to find a way to pay for them over time. So it's hard to keep things stable in that perspective. The other reality is, like it or no, if you're not building new things, old things do come offline, right? Old buildings fall out of service as time goes on, and if they're not being filled or reinvested in, those come off the property tax rolls, and that money gets pushed back out to everybody else that's still there. So.
Doug, we, in our community, we're fortunate. I mean, the school district gets quite a bit of money from the nuke plant and also our fire department. And what I worry about as an elected official in the future is I think of the city of Zion, where they decommissioned their nuke plant. And from what I'm reading, they were not ready for it. And they're having a hard time now. Taxes are going up. And that's my biggest worry for Braidwood.
It's a fair worry, right? So you look at these nuclear facilities, and on average, these are $25 million plus a year in property taxes every year in, year out. Of that, more than 2/3 typically goes to the local school districts. If you pull that money out of a local school district, that's a blow, right? They are a huge asset, and if you pull that out, that's painful, and it's hard to recover. Zion was a tough test case for Illinois, right? At the time, that was still Exelon when they shuttered that facility. Now Constellation, I'm sure everybody in this room knows that Braidwood just reinvested in their facility, right? They're adding capacity. It's great news. They've been performing well, and I think nuclear energy is becoming more important as time goes on. But decommissioning is a real concern, and I'm just going to say, Nancy Norton, if you don't know her, in Grundy County, who I worked with for years, she and I worked together and have spent a lot of time talking about this, meeting with legislators, trying to figure out what those bridges look like. Because a few years ago, Dresden's future didn't seem as certain, right? And it's something that really matters for our communities. And so, finding ways to create either some sort of bridge or continuity payments with those facilities, I think would be particularly valuable. But there's really not much of a vehicle for that right now. So I would say happily we've gotten a bit of a breather because nuclear has become much more important in the short run here in Illinois. As the state continues to sort of move closer to its CEJA goals, the carbon-free electricity has a much higher emphasis on it, and I think it helps keep them profitable for some time to come. But that is something I would encourage any community that's impacted buy nuclear facilities to have a look at that long-term time horizon. There are partners working on it. There's a group of nuclear host communities that work together on issues like this nationally. And it's something to be mindful of. I very sincerely hope that thing runs as long as I'm alive and beyond, but it's definitely something to be mindful of as you go forward. It matters.
Anybody have anything? This is the,
Can I talk?
sure, of course you
Would you
can.
mind, Dale? Are you sure?
Yeah,
Can you hear me, Dale?
I hear you.
Okay. So, in the history with our surrounding, neighborhoods, would you say that the balance of growth between industrial, residential, that balance in growth is a big factor of maintaining those taxes?
So, I mean, short answer, ideally, yes. On a land area basis, right, industrial does kick off a lot of tax dollars relative to the city services used. Right? And there is a balancing act there between, you know, like residential, you're providing more services than you are to an industrial building in general. And so I would say balance matters from a tax perspective. Like we've definitely seen communities look at their percentage allocation of tax dollars, right? So you've got your residential, you've got your commercial, you've got industrial, and to a lesser extent, mineral rights, you know, farms, things like that. Most farms are annexed, but you take my meaning. Look at those percentages and say, oh, this industrial number is lower than we prefer. Yeah, I think we need to add a couple just for balance. Like we have seen that choice being made, but in general, everybody sort of finds their own level in that space, and it really will be different from community to community.
I know our community is, like Chris had said, they're stuck with the mom and pop stores, whereas this council, I'm seeing that we want to move toward the future and keep the updated buildings. And so we're trying to find the balance between the community and bringing in the new business.
Sure. Well, I mean, and again, bringing in new business certainly helps. You know, new buildings for property tax is great. With commercial, I mean, the largest benefit to communities is almost always sales tax dollars. And sales tax dollars are, again, a varying part of the income portfolio for different communities. You know, we see communities like, I don't necessarily want to call them out. I'll just say a community in Eastern Will County that has almost zero property tax dollars because they're so well off in sales tax dollars, I will say. And so you do see that, but in general, again, it's about balance. If you want to limit a property tax levy, and particularly with sales tax, depending on what the project is, there's always this allure of bringing in money from away, right? Property tax dollars are always going to come from your residents, just by definition. Sales tax dollars have the ability to take dollars and attract them from other people around the region that don't live in your community and have them contribute to your community's coffers, right? And that's sort of a unique benefit in that space. So again, it's about finding that balance that works for you.
Chris?
Am I gonna come back up again?
Sure.
You can just talk from the
You,
floor.
no, you can stay back there.
Don't tell them that, make them come up.
So clearly you know the Will County map, or you know the Will County very well. Do you know, I mean, what, are there any kind of other industries or businesses, or is there any talks of any kind of other businesses other than industrial? I mean, what would you love to see, you know, try to, you know, come up and coming, I guess?
So from my perspective, look, I will say manufacturing is still Will County's biggest sector of its economy. It's about 17% of our economy overall by output. a big part of that manufacturing is our chemical and petrochemical cluster, but we also have a lot of durable goods, a lot of energy-related manufacturing. And in just the last year, we had some significant manufacturers come to town at different communities around the county. One doing steel, one doing food, one doing actually parts for renewable energy assets. And so, I mean, for me, it's always going to be manufacturing because that generally has the biggest value add. And, I think too often we think about manufacturing as something that is, the big announcement. Oh, Tesla is building a new factory and they're going to build cars. That's not what most manufacturing is, right? Most of it is smaller companies starting off to fill a niche, right? Making parts for somebody, smaller food manufacturers. In fact, a couple new food manufacturers last year, one that makes beverages. I love the food manufacturing stuff, and that has really ramped up in the last few years as they want to be closer to population centers. We've got a good workforce for it. We have plus or minus 4,000 people just in this county that do food manufacturing every day. And so those are projects I like to see. I will also say, I said earlier, I'm not sure how good I am at predicting the future anymore, but future leaning industries matter too, right? We've been really fortunate here that we've been competitive in the industries that have been successful over the last several decades. But as we look to the future, new industry matters too, whether that is, your data centers, your quantum folks. We were really competitive on that quantum project that ended up siting in Chicago, but I can tell you we're already talking about spinoffs in that space, right? Certainly new energy related projects, and not just solar farms, but the parts and the expertise required to keep those things running. It seems to me capital rotates from sector to sector, right? And so for a long time, we saw a bunch of the big money going into industrial big box. And then in the last several years, we saw a bunch of the big money going into new energy spaces. And now it seems to be chasing data centers, right? And in a few years' time, maybe that is biomedical, maybe it's something else. And it's important that we try to position ourselves to be successful in those spaces. I'm sorry.
It just, because, so I work in Chicago. The company I work for, in the 14 years that I've been working for them, I've seen two areas, UIC and Rush, just that general, those two general, vicinities is just hugely become medical.
Yep.
So I was just curious if you've seen anything in the Will County area down this way, any mention of any kind of medical.
We do see medical growth, and as somebody with a daughter in nursing school, I like seeing that medical growth. So, but it is like we've continued to see a lot of growth in that space. However, medical, at least when you talk about the population serving medical, is sort of retail-y in function, right? It chases rooftops. Retail, you're never going to add big retail without rooftops, right? It's how it works. They want to be proximate to people. It's just. And medical has a similar characteristic. So we've seen some of that growth in different places. We've seen those places expand into more clinic style facilities, trying to be a little bit closer to population centers and watching that grow. As you can see, I have a significant amount of gray, right? We're all aging, and that aging population is continuing to drive that medical growth. In terms of medical parts production or components production, we've seen a little bit of that down here, but that growth has been frankly a little bit slower. We see some areas continuing to perform well there in northeastern Illinois. Lake County's got a good cluster of that. But in general, that does look like a real opportunity market. And it's one, again, you try to make sure you're well positioned for it. What does that mean? Typically workforce and the utilities that you need to be able to support something like that. Some of them are water intensive, some power intensive, and we're actually pretty fortunate on those fronts.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Doug, the reason why I asked that first question is because wasn't it just announced recently that I-55 was going to have another expansion out Lorenzo Road down to our old Route 129 exit? And I just figured if they were doing that, there's probably some big plans for that stretch.
So there are, that project, the Lorenzo Road 129 project, one of them is replacing an interchange that went away some time ago. I'm sure a lot of people in this room remember when 129 had a functioning interchange. That is something that is probably a bit overdue, frankly, a little bit of catch up. The 55 corridor is interesting. We've seen growth, but when you get, down to the River Bridge, right? Should I call it Displains? I guess that's the Displains to Page. It's all the things right there. But when you get to that bridge, that gets pretty constricted now at 2 lanes, and as you head south, ideally, expansion of the freeway sounds great through there. I don't know that is in any realistic or funded programming for IDOT in the near term. The expansions down here have been programmed for many years. I know that they just moved them up into, the timing moved up a little bit, right? So they're going to put some money into it over the next year or so, start to get serious about the engineering. Again, with any highway project, just because you're in the 5-year plan doesn't mean it will be completed within 5 years' time, right? It's subject to funding allocations, and sometimes those get done right away, and sometimes they take many years. But those are, frankly, catch up. I think it's probably fair to say that at least some of that was affiliated with what would have been the west end of Ileana. And, for those of you that don't know, what's the term IDOT used to use? Ileana was in a deep freeze. Realistically, Indiana was our partner on that. They struck everything referencing Ileana from their books a year or 2 ago, and that corridor was not protected. Like Ileana would be essentially a start over at this point. The environmental work would need to be redone, and so the likelihood of that is pretty limited. To your north in terms of east-west corridors, Wilmington Peatone Road is a county road, right? They've been conducting a study on what that needs to look like going forward, but that's your most likely east-west corridor improvement in the near term. So.
Well, look at how long it took 355 to go from Bolingbrook. I lived in Bolingbrook, and those pillars were sitting there waiting for ramps to be placed for probably 15 years.
Many years. I want to make a joke about dragonflies here, but I won't. That 355 corridor was a long time in coming, and 80 was a long time in coming. Right? They're making good progress now, but that was a long time in coming. So you look around this region, and we have freeways that construction was completed. The early 60s on a lot of these, and a lot of those configurations are largely the same as they were then. You can say freight traffic is a factor, and it is, but we sure didn't have 700,000 people in this county then either, right? And so you've seen a lot of traffic impact increases since that time.
Did anybody have any? I have questions, so unless anybody wants
I
to
have
jump
one.
in. Go ahead.
So Doug, as a small community that we are, and a community that seems to want to stay to be a small community, what suggestions might you have for what the council might need to be working on towards helping the community stay small, but yet have enough business to increase enough tax flow to keep as much of the property taxes down as possible?
So I think when you talk about just basic level, setting the framework for how you want to grow and what you want to be, right? It definitely begins with planning and zoning, right? Setting the table for what properties you want to see develop in what way, right? And if you have a particular aversion to a type of growth in a part of town, and the council agrees on that, you know, that should probably be reflected in your plan. But when you talk about actively trying to grow, right? We do a whole course on this for elected officials, just sort of what you should know about development. I know some of you have been there. It's fairly straightforward, right? Know the rules, like know your planning and zoning. Know what tools you have to help bring development to the community. Know what assets you're selling. Right? That is incredibly important. If you know you have land that has the infrastructure around it that's ready to go, that's a big deal. Right? And if you're trying to sell, you know, a piece of property that's a little far flung and it's going to take you 18 months and you got to run a TIF out to pay for the infrastructure to run out there, that's a less competitive site. Right? Know your community, right? So if there are data points that are valuable, say to a retailer, right, and say, okay, this is our traffic on this roadway, this is our community population, this is our trade area, this is, you know, the income in our trade area, right? I know there's video running. I hope it's not going to the retailers because I'm going to say they're pretty boring, right? These guys are formulaic. You can go on a lot of their websites and they'll say like, oh, you want a Trader Joe's? Cool. You've got to have a road with 30,000 average daily traffic on it every day. You've got to have 100,000 people in a 10-mile radius with $125,000 income. Like that, and so these are formula driven, and different retailers have different metrics, you know, that they will use. But it's helpful to know that. The other thing I will say is, like, when you're recruiting for things that I think most folks like, you know, restaurants and retail, most folks like that. You want somewhere to go eat. You want somewhere to be able to pick up stuff in town. Very often, I think communities have a lot of success with finding something they like in another community, going and talking to the owner. We've seen a lot of restaurants do that, where they will grow and expand into neighboring communities just because, like, oh, hey, this works over here, maybe it'll work over here. And so it helps to know your community when you're having those conversations. Beyond that, I will say tone matters. You know, I can't imagine you've got big audiences for council meetings, but maybe you do, right? Maybe thousands tuning in from around the state. But when folks are looking at investing in a community, they will watch that stuff. They will look at a community and how welcoming they are. I think that, you know, incentive structures are useful, but again, it's about targets, right? It's about securing things that create value for the community. Not every deal needs one. Some really do. Some industries are profoundly competitive, and they do need that if you want them in the community. So it is, again, know who you are, know how you fit into the regional economy. Try to have a sense of what people want. And, you know, in smaller communities, I mean, let's be honest, we're building sort of space by space, brick by brick, if you will, right? It's unlikely that you're going to have, you know, Target and Home Depot descend on town tomorrow and demand to build, right? And these are things that you've got to build over time, find the right fit, and build it up over time. And if Target and Home Depot do come to town tomorrow, I'm happy to be wrong.
Don, back, you were talking about the growth of Will County. Are there, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago, are there any, I spent most of my life in Will County, but are there any towns that are dropping in population? I'll give you a minute to think about it, but I grew up in Joliet, so I think of Rockdale. Rockdale's kind of landlocked, and it used to be pretty busy along their meadow there, and it's not now. And I thought I checked, and it looked like Rockdale may have lost some population, but other than that, I couldn't think of any, or if anyone else knows. But
I'm not going to lie, I wouldn't be super enthusiastic about calling them out if they were losing population. But to my knowledge, no, off the top of my head. But I will say, it is possible in communities where you've seen, smaller communities like Rockdale that are landlocked and have limited growth potential. Yeah, I mean, you look in some of the small communities in East County. I don't want to like say Simmerton out loud and it's central, but like not a lot of new building permits out there. So if a couple folks move away, maybe. Most of the growth has been a little bit more modest the last, 15 or 20 years, really since post '08. Will County was one of the fastest growing counties in the country through the 90s and early to mid 2000s. Still one of the faster growing ones here in Illinois, but relative to some of the Sun Belt states that have really been exploding, not so much. And we just crossed the 700,000 threshold people just in the last census update, and we were 692,000 in 2010, right? So growth, but not the crazy explosive growth that we saw before. So you may see some wiggle numbers in the smaller communities, but in general, incremental growth. Most housing stock is incredibly full. That's been true for some time, and so as long as the buildings are still there, they're generally pretty full, and you're not experiencing loss in that way. And I think most folks know, property values are up a bunch, and I think that's indicative of the demand we're seeing to live here.
Is that, do you see a lot of that coming from Cook County down this way?
Oh, the movement of folks? Oh yeah, that's absolutely still a thing.
Cheaper tax, cheaper property taxes.
Cheaper tax, in many cases a little bit more room, right? We see a lot of folks move to the community when it's time to start raising a family, right? We see a lot of folks move in their early 30s. That has been common here for some time, right? It's I don't want to get too nerdy, but like population pyramid, percentage of your population that is 0 to 4 years old or 0 to 5, 5 to 10 and so on. And we always had this bit of what I called the tightening of the belt, 19 to 29-year-olds, right? So kids, they would either go away to school or maybe just move away from mom and dad's, whatever the case would be. We would lose population at that age, which is totally normal for suburban communities and ex-urban communities in general. But we see folks move back then in their late 20s and early 30s and stick around for a while. And it's a function of housing stock. So,
Chris?
I'm excited.
Oh, I'm
Good.
sorry, Mike.
Go ahead, yep.
Give someone else a shot.
Yeah, please.
I like Chris.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your organization itself. I think you mentioned it's a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Is it affiliated with the county? Is it funded by taxpayer dollars? And can you describe some of the relationships that you have that help you accomplish the things that your organization accomplishes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a nonprofit organization. We are somewhere between 2/3 and 70% funded by the private sector, actually. So our organization is largely comprised of nearly all of the large employers in and around the county. Most of your big manufacturers, the hospitals, the colleges are usually part of our board and organization. We also do have participation from the county as well, and most of our Will County communities. But again, the lion's share of the funding does come from the private sector, and it's about their ambition to sort of lift the economy, right? And let's be honest, it takes a little bit of altruism to be a part of an organization like ours, but there should also be a benefit. These are places that benefit from the population increasing, benefit from investment increasing in the region, either because they're doing business with those folks, or because they're educating them, or they're moving to town and spending on goods and services. But in terms of partners, it's a very long list. I will be candid. We, as an organization, have never accomplished anything alone, right? We've got great partners in our communities. When we're working a deal, a project specifically, we're almost always turning to our community partners. Will County's a big place, right? 280,000 parcels around the county, 850 square miles. I don't know every property. I don't know where water and sewer is stubbed in every community, right? So we rely on our community partners to help us guide projects to specific spaces. We rely heavily on state and regional development partners to assist us with some of the coordination when you have large projects coming to town and looking at multiple sites in and around Illinois. The state's an important partner. They're an important attraction partner for us as things come in the front door. Our utilities, honestly, ComEd and NICOR are such a big part of what we do every day, because pretty much everything that comes to town needs power and gas, and it's a huge constraint on projects. Educational institutions, whether it be at JJC to help with specific targeted training, or the universities to help provide evidence that students are graduating, job seeking, learning these technical skills, and developing curriculums. There are certainly people that I'm missing on that list, but even just on the project side, I mean, it's a big list. And then when you look at other things, legislative issues, certainly our state legislative and federal legislative partners from around the county are super helpful. Infrastructure, IDOT, Will County DOT, and the communities. It's all partnerships, right? It's simply too big to ever attempt to manage all of that on your own. And so we have a lot of partners at the table that help.
Doug, a number of us have attended a couple of your events, and we found it very beneficial. What would you say are the number of municipalities in Will County, or the percentage of them that actually attend CED events, and how do they find them helpful?
So I would say an overwhelming majority do attend, right? 37 municipalities, 38 if you count that one parcel Oswego's got in the county. And Oswego's great, and they count. So an overwhelming share of them both actively participate in our organization. We like to go out and meet with them and talk with them, and then come to the events as well. And I think from an events standpoint, right, I'd love to tell you that they like to listen to me monologue for 45 minutes, but y'all have heard that tonight. It's not that great, right? So it really is, it's about the room, right? It's about the partners that are in that room. And so, at one of our events, maybe we'll be lucky enough to have 300-400 people there. And again, it's the people that I'm describing. It's the other mayors, it's the county folks, it's the legislators, it's the educational institutions, and it's also the businesses that are invested in the community. And, one thing that I think gets taken for granted in the development space is, you see headlines, right? A new company coming to town, new company building this new thing, great. It is great. The real thing is, though, the relationships with the businesses that are in your community, right? And so anytime we have an opportunity to connect municipal elected officials and staff with the businesses that are on the ground in their community and they're working with, it makes those businesses more secure, more stable. They need to know who they can call when to get things handled, right? Things come up in businesses, problems that you don't know how to solve. And so those connections and those, not only just retention, keeping them here, but making sure that they know you're ready for their growth opportunities if they come. I think that's one of the biggest and most important connection points we can make. Our organization actually invested in somebody just this past year for the first time in a long time, full time, to focus on exactly that, like just business retention, working with the communities, just to spend time with existing businesses and making sure that we're heading off any challenges that they face. The worst thing that happens is when you get a call to say, hey, I'm moving out of town, right? I'm going to go over to Kane County. Like, I don't want to hear that ever. And if you're having conversation, yeah, actually ever. No, I don't want them to get any of our business. It is, if you're having those conversations early on, a lot of times you can head that off, help them find something that works for them in town.
another small point to that is, in attending some of your events, you've been offering advice and counsel. Uh, So you're available to different councils in the community to offer assistance and help, aren't you?
Oh, of course, yeah. Whether it is, just, a meeting, a phone call, my cell phone rings a lot. And, sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, what are you hearing? What's out there? Sometimes it's a very specific challenge. Like I'm lucky enough doing what I do in Will County. I get to work on some pretty cool stuff, right? And, just the opportunity to talk through some of the ideas, what communities want to do. Always happy to do that, and sometimes it's really laser specific. Hey, a company's coming to town on Tuesday. Can you be here? Yeah. And so sometimes it's difficult to define what that role is, and I would just say it's whatever the community and or the company need for that particular deal, because it's always different. It's always different.
Well, another comment I have is I'd like to say thank you for coming out to a town hall event
Oh, this
to
is
help
great.
us discuss and learn from you. And we really appreciate all the value that you guys offer. So I'm very happy to see you come and offer your advice and comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, we get a couple more minutes, Chris, if you want.
Yeah, I was just saying,
ask
Chris,
something.
what do you got?
I was just trying to help fill the time.
Oh,
Well, we appreciate that.
My only concern, my only thought with growth is, and so I'm not picking on industrial, I'm talking residential, and commercial, whatever, we're talking about taking up farmland.
Yep.
In the early nineties, I used to be, living in Joliet, I used to be able to jump on my snowmobile, drive all the way to Stone Container in Plainfield, where I work. And during summer, same thing with my dirt bike, four-wheeler, doesn't matter. Can't do that anymore. So Goshen, over in Mantino, they're buying up, farmland left and right. Farmers are lining up to go sell their properties to Goshen.
Right.
So, I mean, do you ever get to a point or a thought where you're just like, man, I mean, we're losing farmland, faster than I've ever seen it, in the future, we're talking about grandkids and great grandkids in the future. Are you ever worried about keeping space?
Well, I think preserving space is important. And I will say, here in Will County, we're still about 45% of our land, or 44, I don't want to exaggerate, 44, 45% of our land area is still actively in farms. Again, big place, you go south of 80 and you've got a lot of, active farm areas, but that has diminished over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, that might've been 50%. And that's a real thing. And it's a change that we see in a lot of places. And I think there is a real argument to be made that where you can go in and do brownfield redevelopment, right? Take an old site and redevelop it. There is real value in that. And land preservation, whether it be that, agricultural, forest preserve, wetland areas, that is a real concern and something that folks need to be mindful of. And I will tell you, there are people who are just endlessly smarter than me, fully devoted to those spaces and trying to make sure that preservation is taking place. Just north of town here, we have the largest tall grass prairie in the country, right? Medewan, which is 19,000 acres, right? I mean, that was really solid reuse of a brownfield area, right? Cleaning up the arsenal and devoting a lot of land area to that. It's great. I'm tired of folks telling me they didn't see the bison when they visited. Like, that's my fault, but like that's the thing that happens. But in general, land preservation and sort of that balancing act is important. And I will say one thing to bear in mind on that is sort of this concept of municipal sovereignty. And in the same way that I won't go into a community and tell them, like, gee whiz, that this is the community you've got to build. We also don't have the ability to tell them, like, hey, you can't develop that. And so town by town, and particularly the ones that are a little bit more urbanized, very often they're being incredibly mindful of the last of their agricultural land, and trying to control the zoning, be thoughtful about it. And that is, look, those are not easy decisions, and they go project by project by project. And so I would say being mindful matters, picking off the best land areas to do, the development that you want to do matters. I won't give a proper dissertation on, compact communities and denser residential development, but like that matters too for a lot of communities. And so, like a lot of other things, it's about choices, project by project, but it's a really fair concern. It is.
I have another question based off of that with the Goshen, the topic of Goshen. The recent eminent domain that was passed in Illinois, do you see that affecting Will County much more than it already has with the 10 acres given to, out of the forest preserves? I think it was last year.
I have to confess that I'm not expert on that. I don't know that I've watched that play out, and so I don't want to guess at it. That one, I'm not sure. So.
Well, why don't we thank Doug for coming on a call, your insights and expertise and knowledge for Will County coming out on a cold winter night, and everybody else.
Thank you, Doug.
Of course.
Thank you.
And-
We appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Doug. And Tuesday, February 11th, we'll have another town hall. It'll be Darren Bauer, it's Darren, isn't it? Darren Bauer? And Ellie DeRazio from the car dealerships that are planning to move in. So that's Tuesday at 6, February 11th. Thank you.
Thank you.